Open a terminal in your Linux Mint and enter the following commands to update your terminal and install Dynogen and Dynamips. Enter these commands to start configuring the network of your Linux Mint. The first command is recommended, as it will copy your current configuration into your home directory. Next, install an editor. I chose gedit as an example. Go into network settings and turn off IPv4. Enter the following commands to edit your network interface, and configure your network to have the following parameters as shown. Be sure to change your IP addresses. Restart your network to apply the changes you made. If your output shows an error, reboot your Linux Mint. Start your Dynamips process by entering the following command. Then create your first router by creating a directory for your router and editing the contents of your router's configuration file. Enter the following Dynogen commands to start your router. Open a new terminal window and telnet into your first router. Enter the following commands to enable the bridge and tap interfaces. Then go into your router and give the interface an IP address. After entering these commands, enter the right command to save your configuration. Test connectivity between your Linux Mint and your router by sending pings from your router to your Linux Mint, and vice versa. Edit the following file and enter this command line to give you access to the web. Then enter the next command to update those changes into the configuration file. Enter the following commands to check for updates and to install TFTP. Then edit the following TFTP file and copy the configuration shown in the video. Create a directory for TFTP and restart the following service. Once finished, move your cme.tar file into the TFTP directory you have just created. Change the permission of the TFTP directory and go to your router. In your router, enter the following commands to start the flashing process. Enter the following commands to enable the web GUI interface for your VoIP phone, as well as the user authenticating into the web interface. Create a Windows virtual machine and follow the video for its configuration. When setting the IP address of your Windows operating system, give an IP that is in the same subnet as your router and your Linux Mint operating system. Turn off the Windows firewall and configure Windows Audio Service to start automatically upon boot. Download and install the Cisco IP phone, and configure the IP phone with its default settings. Once a message box with the message "Unable to reach TFTP server" pops up, click OK and specify the TFTP server with the IP address of your router. Once the IP phone is finished loading, go to your Linux Mint and enter the IP address of your router to navigate to its GUI. In the GUI, add a new phone, accepting its default settings, and add a new extension along with the name of your liking for the newly created IP phone. Back to the terminal, enter the following commands to add a button to your IP phone. Then go to your Windows operating system and restart the IP phone by closing and opening it back up. Once the IP phone is loaded, you should see the DN number on the top right of the screen, and the name you configured on the bottom left of the screen. Enter your router configuration file and add a second router. From your terminal, enter the following commands, assuming that you have just opened a new window. When starting your Dynagen process, be sure to start both R1 and R2 by following the commands entered for R1 and doing the same for R2. You can now access both routers from your Linux CLI. In your R2 CLI, configure its interface with an IP address in the same subnet as all your other machines. Be sure to do the right command to save your configuration. To test your configuration so far, go to R2 and do a ping test with all the machines you have created. Just like the first router you created, start the flashing process once again, but this time with your second router. After the flashing process is finished, configure the second router to have a GUI interface, accessible through the Linux Mint operating system. Create a new Windows operating system with the same configuration as the first one, except for its IP address. Install the Cisco IP phone the same way you did with the first one. Once you get to the TFTP part, remember to put the IP address of your R2. Setting up the second IP phone is also very similar to setting up the first one. Just remember to change the IP addresses and the DN number. Here is our last step to setting up the two VoIP phones. Go into the Linux Mint terminal with your two router CLIs open and configure dial peer for both VoIP phones. Set the destination pattern that will match both IP phones and set the session target as the IPs of the routers. Our final test is to call from one phone to the other. On one of the IP phones, enter the DN of the other IP phone. If all was configured properly, you should see one of the IP phones receiving a call from the other.